Hello and welcome viewers and subscribers of AVG News. My name is Mxolisi, the son of Nobe, and I'm reaching you here from Johannesburg. There are a number of questions which emanated from our last live broadcast, which we did yesterday. And as promised, I thought that I should come back and respond to them, but not that I'm responding from my own personal perspective. You don't have to take as gospel truth everything that I'm going to say. Uh, the idea is for us to engage because there is no foolproof idea in as far as politics is concerned, especially in as far as Zimbabwean politics is concerned. So the idea is for us to engage on these things so that at the end of the day we find a lasting solution that is going to work for all of us. I'm just waiting for people to join in as promised. Then we can set it off. Right now, I see there is one person who is live with us. I'm waiting for you. Just one more person or more. Then we continue with the live. So there are a number of questions that were sent to me via WhatsApp and Facebook, and I'll go through some of them. Actually, there's 6 of them. The first one is, how do you think the legitimacy crisis will affect Zimbabwe's economic future? Number 2, why is it so difficult to remove Zanu PF? Number 3, don't you think Zimbabwe needs an uprising? That's an interesting one. Number 4, do you think there is a chance for fresh elections in Zimbabwe? I think that emanates from the calls by Triple C, especially that Zimbabwe must go to fresh elections supervised by the SADC and the African Union. The other question is, there are attempts by Sapes Trust to force a national transitional authority in Zim. Do you think this will work? That's another one. Coups in Africa, the last one. What causes them, and do you think they are the best way to go? So I will, because I see there are people already online, I will try and tackle these questions one by one. The first one, how do you think the legitimacy crisis will affect Zimbabwe's economic future? So, well, I will delve into this one right away, but don't forget, before I go ahead, may I request you to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and also share it. So the first question is, how do you think the legitimacy crisis will affect Zimbabwe's economic future? I think this emanates from the claims that without fresh elections or without an endorsement of the elections in Zimbabwe by especially the opposition, then there will be a legitimacy crisis. And we have heard that part of the mainstream opposition's claims is that Zimbabwe is failing to rebuild its economy because there is a legitimacy crisis. We've seen them going around making this claim. We've seen them even where they write on social media or through their statement, the several statements that they've issued since 2018. They've been talking about a legitimacy crisis as the main cause of Zimbabwe's continued economic rot. But I would like to differ with this. Fine, the legitimacy crisis may have some implications in as far as international partners or would be international partners, other countries dealing with Zimbabwe. But internally, I don't foresee or I don't see how a legitimacy crisis can be said or be blamed for a lack of progress economically for Zimbabwe. For starters, there are two main reasons why Zimbabwe is in its financial or economic doldrums. The first one being that there are sanctions which are hitting the country, which we can say emanated from the actions of Zanu PF. But the main one, the opposition itself will tell you that they argue that the sanctions are not the main problem in Zimbabwe. So the main one being that one, Zanu PF is failing to plan the economy. They are failing to keep the economy afloat. They are failing to increase production in the country, not because of a legitimacy crisis, but because of their own incapabilities. I'll give an example. During the days of Ian Smith, fine, it will be debatable, but during the days of Ian Smith, Zimbabwe was under sanctions. South Africa here was under sanctions during apartheid. But economically, these countries were not in as much dire straits as Zimbabwe is. The economy of Zimbabwe began to take a nosedive, not after sanctions, but before, because the Zanu PF government has never been able to plan the economy. There's never been economic planning under Zanu PF. They came up with ISAP early 90s. There were no sanctions on Zimbabwe by then. That's when the economy began to take a nosedive. Then in 1996, they gave war veterans 50,000 each from funds that were not budgeted for. The economy took another knock. In 1998, they involved themselves, or they involved Zimbabwe in a military operation in the Democratic Republic of Congo without a green light from the AU, without a green light from SADC. They went there using Zimbabwean funds. And then in 2000, before the sanctions, they embarked on what they called an agrarian reform program. All these had nothing to do with a legitimacy crisis. So if Zanu PF gets their act together, Zimbabwe will rise from its financial doldrums. We have seen examples in Rwanda. There is a legitimacy crisis there. The opposition in Rwanda will tell you that Kagame is a dictator, a serious dictator. But Rwanda is booming. The Rwandan economy is booming. In Libya under Gaddafi, the opposition was outlawed in as far as contesting for the presidency. And Gaddafi would say through his green book that the population doesn't need a government. He was good at national planning. He was brilliant. Russia, the opposition in Russia will tell you that Putin is a dictator. Look at China. The economy is booming. It's one of the best in the world. Not because of the politics, but because the people who are in charge of the economy, of government, know how to plan an economy. So whether there is a legitimacy crisis or not in Zimbabwe, if Zanu PF is prepared to rebuild the Zimbabwean economy, to stamp out corruption, looting with impunity, and if they are ready to deal with the currency crisis that we have, because there is no production in Zimbabwe, not because of the legitimacy crisis, but because the people who are in charge of the economy do not have ideas on how to rebuild it, on how to cut down on inflation, on how to deal with inflation, and how to deal with the currency crisis in the country. So I believe I've answered that question. But of course, this is my response. You can challenge it. the idea is for us to discuss. Then the other one, the second question is, why is it so difficult for Zimbabweans to remove ZANU-PF from power? I think that is where our main problem is. We believe that, and that is where the main problem of the opposition as well is. We believe that we can rebuild Zimbabwe by removing ZANU-PF from power, or that we cannot rebuild Zimbabwe without removing ZANU-PF from power. I believe that any political party which was formed to remove ZANU-PF from power is responsible for the problems that we have in Zimbabwe right now. Because every political party should be formed based on a certain ideology, and removing one party from power cannot be said to be an ideology. With or without ZANU-PF, it is possible to rebuild the Zimbabwean economy. With or without ZANU-PF in charge, it is possible to rebuild the Zimbabwean economy. Political parties should be formed to pursue a certain ideological perspective towards making Zimbabwe better, towards making the lives of Zimbabweans better. And there can be no way forward if we don't involve ZANU-PF. The main problem with the mainstream opposition since 2000 is that they have focused more of their efforts on trying to remove ZANU-PF. And this has given ZANU-PF thick skin. We remember the mantra by the mainstream opposition from 2000 has been ZANU must go. There's been very little as to what they are going to do to turn around the economy of Zimbabwe, whether ZANU-PF goes or not. And when you say that ZANU-PF must go, then to them, it becomes a regime change agenda. Why do you want them to go? Who do you want to put in? Because if we believe that ZANU-PF is failing to run the economy of Zimbabwe, we must point out where they are failing, why they are failing, and where we want to improve, and what we want to do better than them, and how we want to do it better than them. And that how a party plans the economy is based on its ideological leaning. Without an ideology, which has been the biggest problem with us Zimbabweans, there is no way that you can build an economy. ZANU-PF, for all their problems, have taken a position to say that they are a socialist movement. And that's why every time they take to the stage, they're always talking about our people. The opposition, they claim, if you have to check this, every opposition party that is formed in Zimbabwe, if you corner them and ask them what their ideology is, most of them will tell you that they are social democrats without any scant regard, with scant regard to what that ideology means. Give an example of South Africa. There are a number of political parties, but each is pursuing a certain ideology, which is unique to itself. But in Zimbabwe, as I have said, every opposition political party that gets formed will claim that they are they are social democrats because they've read this somewhere, but they don't understand what social democracy means. They don't even show this in their policies. They don't show this in their speeches. That's why, at the end of the day, we have political parties that are where the leader gets prominence ahead of the party's ideology, ahead of the party itself. Is because we don't have any ideology that we are pursuing. We just want to remove ZANU-PF from power. We just want to accrue power. And at the end of the day, we become players in this toxic politics, in this politics of antagonism, whereby we cannot convert or sit on the table with even those that we are fighting to say, we are not fighting you for power, but we are fighting you for the betterment of Zimbabweans, for the rebuilding of the Zimbabwean economy. That is why whenever a new party is formed, you find those that are already in the space of the opposition, of our opposition politics, accusing them of being Zanu PF stooges. It's because to them, the space that exists is for those who want to remove Zanu PF. So, because there can be only one party in State House, every new party that is formed is perceived to be fighting for the same space to go into State House. I'll give an example. If there is a party which sprouts today, wins the whole of the Matabeleland region, I think there are 12 seats in Bulawayo, 12 in Mat South, that's 24, 13 in Mat North, that's 37 seats, and represents the people of Matabeleland. And another party sprouts up to win the whole of Manicaland. There are 27 seats, if I'm not mistaken, and it wins all 27 seats in Manicaland to represent the interests of the people of Manicaland. And then we get another party whose ideological leaning is towards the minority races in Zimbabwe or minority religions in Zimbabwe, without focusing on ZANU-PF, but to focus on delivering for those constituents. Zimbabwe will be a better country. Zimbabweans will live a better life because there will be parties that are focused on a certain constituency without having to focus on State House. And there will even be a paradigm shift within ZANU-PF to say, instead of focusing on remaining in power, why don't we focus on that which will make sure that these constituents that are voting these other parties will vote for us? That will not mean beating up people, because they have seen that beating up people doesn't work. They tried that in the 1980s when there was ZAPU. They tried with the Kukura Wondi. But at the end of the day, the people of Matabeleland still voted ZAPU because ZAPU's ideology resonated with the people of Matabeleland. But right now, we have parties saying ZANU must go, and everybody else who tries to occupy the opposition space is then perceived to be a ZANU-PF stooge, not because they have been proved to be ZANU-PF stooges, but because they are perceived to be opponents in the space to be the mainstream opposition, in the space to take over from ZANU-PF. So that is where our problem is. Number 3, don't you think Zim needs an uprising? I have always spoken up against people who want to take power by force, against people who believe that violence or a coup can give us a better Zimbabwe. We have been through a coup. In 2017, there was a coup in Zimbabwe. We know what has happened. We are crying right now in Zimbabwe because that coup didn't give us what we celebrated thinking it was going to give us. People who stage coups are always doing it for themselves. They are never doing it for the people. We saw that people rolled tanks because they'd had their power base threatened by the G40. We saw the army rolling out tanks. They pretended they were our friends. We took selfies with them all over the world where there were Zimbabweans. They celebrated on the streets because they thought that this was a new dispensation that would look, because we were told that the voice of the people is the voice of God, but the people that were speaking at that particular time, we believed that it was us, yet it wasn't. And because we were drunk with this urge to see Mugabe gone, we were saying Mugabe must go. We all celebrated. Mugabe himself gave us a warning and we didn't heed it. A number of civic leaders told us that we would regret that. And we are regretting. Not that we are regretting Mugabe being pushed out because we all wanted his back, but we are regretting that we took sides with a Zanu-PF faction, including the mainstream opposition leaders. We saw them celebrating. So they also became players in Zanu-PF's internal fights. And at the end of the day, we elevated one Zanu-PF faction above another, and what we remained with was Zanu-PF. We were trying to do the same. We saw many people, despite several warnings and red flags, celebrating that Xavier Kasukuwere was challenging Emmerson Mnangagwa. We seem to have this belief that if somebody is pushed out of ZANU-PF, they become better. We saw even Nelson Chamisa when he was campaigning, say Mugabe, hunza kunobhora ndikohese. And he was even celebrating that Mugabe was choosing his side over that of Emmerson Mnangagwa. Even this year when he was celebrating, he would always mention Robert Mugabe as some form of an icon, because we are quick to forget. So people who stage coup, good examples, Equatorial Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and now Gabon. Just watch and see. The people there will be crying foul very soon, because soldiers or anyone who leads a coup never ever does it for the people. We saw it in Madagascar. We have seen it all over the world. So I don't think that Zimbabwe needs an uprising. I don't and Zimbabwe is a product of an uprising, because our parents took arms against the regime of Ian Smith. They ended up, of course, going to the negotiating table. But at the end of the day, right now, they are holding us at ransom because they claim that they are former liberation movement, and whatever we come up with, we cannot challenge them because they liberated us, so to say. That is what they say. So once somebody takes up guns against ZANU-PF today, believe you me, once they succeed in removing ZANU-PF through the gun or through an uprising, they will never be removed. So the best way forward would be for Zimbabweans to go back to the negotiating table with ZANU-PF, unfortunately, to make sure that we reach a concession whereby we get a transition from this toxic politics that we have without threatening their power base. And transitionally, we rebuild Zimbabwe's politics and get the politics of ideology, the politics which focuses on the people, the politics directed by the masses, the politics in which the masses are the main beneficiaries, so that even those who are in power are kept accountable to the masses and eventually do not fear leaving those positions of power. Because if you rule according to the demands of the people, there is no way that you want to cling on, because you know that the people are your masters and they can take you out anytime. And when they take you out, you will be able to leave. So an uprising is absolutely out. Do you think there is a chance for fresh elections in Zimbabwe? Unfortunately, there is a lot that needs to be invested into efforts towards forcing fresh elections. The first being, as I said yesterday, us going to court to force the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to admit that they got things wrong. And we can only do that through producing evidence. The reason for going to court should not be perceived as a reason to push ZANU-PF out, because if you try and push them out, they will push back. And at the end of the day, everything will go haywire. So if we have evidence that there were gross irregularities in the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission's running of the elections. If we have that evidence, then we can have the courts ruling in our favor. If we have that evidence and we produce that evidence, and we also produce that evidence to the SADC and the AU, but before then, it has to be stated that legally in Zimbabwe, only the Constitutional Court can rule that fresh elections are the best way forward. And the only way they can rule that way is for us to go to the court to prove again with evidence that there were gross irregularities, that those gross irregularities affected the running of the elections and therefore affected the results of the election. Then the court will consider those and rule that the elections had gross irregularities as brought forward and therefore cannot be allowed to stand. The other issue is that only, according to the Zimbabwean law, only the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission is mandated to run the elections in Zimbabwe. So forget about forcing elections that are supervised by SADC or the AU. We are not coming from war where we don't have institutions in place that can be adjudged to be able to run elections in Zimbabwe. So unless and until the ZEC is adjudged to be unable by a Zimbabwean court to run elections, but now that will take some doing again, because even if it is adjudged to be unable, the court can call for the reconstitution of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. There is no way that I foresee SADC or the AU being set to supervise Zimbabwean elections unless and until, with Zimbabwe in this current state where there are institutions that are deemed to be functioning well. The other question is, so the long and short of it is that I don't foresee Zimbabwe going for fresh elections, despite all the noises, despite all the process, the protests that have been planned all over the country, all over the embassies in the world. I don't foresee Zimbabwe ever going to fresh elections. And the other worrying factor is that despite those protests being called, here in South Africa, I think they failed twice. The second date was set for today. There is no protest taking place, and we were told that it will be next week. And the anger will die down, the emotions will die down. People will go back to living their own lives, to hustling for survival, and this might even fail to take off. And Nangagwa might even be inaugurated. And we are hearing that all is set for his inauguration. And once he goes there into State House, it's game over. So the opposition, or Zimbabweans rather, had 7 days during which to submit their papers in court, to file their court papers. We are hearing from the grapevine that CCC has gone to court to challenge the presidential election. I'm not sure if that is true. And if it is true that they're only challenging the presidential election, then again, that becomes faulty, because you cannot take from an election that you say was grossly mismanaged, take your wins, and then you throw away your losses. Because at the end of the day, once you accept one result from this election, it means that you are affecting every other result, except if you have grounds to say, in Mashonaland West, people didn't vote, they were beaten up, some polling stations were not opened, so therefore it has to be rerun. But at the end of the day, even if you say that, you are also saying that, therefore, even the parliamentary election or result there, you are challenging. Or if you say, maybe in Mashonaland West, every other level, the ballot papers were there, but there was no presidential ballot paper in certain number of stations then. But if you are saying that everything else was okay at every other level except presidential, you are then saying that only the presidential election was mismanaged. It becomes faulty somewhere. But we don't know. These guys are lawyers. Maybe they know better. There are attempts by Subpace Trust to force a national transitional authority in Zimbabwe. Do you think this will work? I have to be honest. I don't think this is going to work because, number one, if it has to be forced without a court ruling, it cannot work unless and until Zanu PF itself accedes to that. But why would Zanu PF accede to a national transitional authority when they have been declared winners of an election and they believe that they are winners of this election, and Zimbabweans are just sitting there waiting for the next move from Zanu PF? So unless and until Zanu PF, which is the winner of this election, has been adjudged to not having won this election by the court, there is no way a national transitional authority can be enforced on them. And if Mnangagwa is inaugurated and a new parliament comes into place, a new government comes into place, only Zanu PF can lead any charting of a national transitional authority. That is according to me. And they will tell you that, okay, we have a Pollard, or they can come up with something like a Pollard. Already Mnangagwa has said that he's inviting to those that contested him to come on board and help him run the country and help Zanu PF or his government to run the country. Already is extending the hand to his opponents to say, okay, I defeated you, but I'm still ready to work with you. Bring your ideas. Let us work together. And I believe that sitting here, unless and until there is evidence that the elections were grossly misadministered, Zimbabweans need to start working together. And I've always argued that the best way forward for Zimbabweans is for us to have electioneering seasons where we campaign, we expose each other. But after the elections have come and gone, it's time for us to then become Zimbabweans. Support whoever is won if they've won correctly. And if we're saying that they stole the elections, we have to prove that in court. If we don't have the proof, then let us sit down on the table and map the way forward. This issue of being toxic with each other, insulting each other, is we're seeing on Twitter. We're seeing Zanu PF people, they're mocking those that lost, they're mocking the opposition to say, Muchingo Vokura, we're going to tonga you. At the end of the day, it doesn't benefit the ordinary Zimbabwean. Those others are saying, you stole the election, they're insulting Mnangagwa, they're insulting Zanu PF, they are insulting everyone who says to them, bring the proof, go to court, prove that you were robbed of these elections, then the court will rule. They're insulting everyone else. So at the end of the day, this insulting one another is one of the reasons why why Zimbabwe is not moving forward. We are failing to think nationally. We are failing to think for the good of the country called Zimbabwe. We are failing to think for the good of Zimbabweans, ordinary Zimbabweans who have got nothing to benefit from these political skirmishes that we keep involving ourselves in. So at the end of the day, after the elections, those who lose elections should lose with honor. Those who win elections should know that they didn't win it for themselves, and it's not a chance to be mocking those who lost, because at the end of the day, people gave you their trust and they want you to change their lives. They don't want you to go around threatening people, calling them little boys, telling them that your jails are not full, you want to jail them. No, 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 no. Let us allow people to speak up. Let us allow people to demonstrate their feelings. For as long as they do this within the confines of the law, it is part of their rights. Listen to them, engage them, take their petitions, read them, respond to them, tell them why you cannot do certain things that they demanded. Tell them why you are doing certain things that they didn't foresee, but do not beat them up. Don't arrest them. Don't threaten them unless and until they have gone beyond the confines of the law. And where they have done that, deal them within the confines of the law. We are 43 years into independence. We cannot be trying to teach people who claim that they brought that independence on how to run a country, because we believe that when people went to war, they knew how they wanted to be governed. They knew how they wanted to live. Give them that. People wanted to be free. They still want to be free. 43 years later, they are still clamoring for freedom. And they're even now drawing parallels with Ian Smith, with some of them saying Smith was better. This should be a call for self-introspection within those that claim that they are a liberation war movement, that claim that they brought independence to Zimbabwe. There can be no freedom in Zimbabwe unless and until every Zimbabwean feels that they are free. Coups in Africa, what causes them? And do you think they are the best way to go? I think I've already responded to this one. Coups are not staged in the best interest of the ordinary people. Coups are staged because somebody is impatient to use the legal way, to use the political way of getting into a position to lead the people. It's people who are impatient to rule, not to lead. It's people who are disregarding the law. Because when you stage a coup, you are saying that you are suspending the constitution. You are saying that you are disregarding every arm of state. You are disregarding every state institution and taking matters into your own hands. People who do that will never be doing it for the people. They will never do it for you. They do it because they have identified a gap to get into power and further suppress you. So don't celebrate coups, regardless of what the reason behind B is. And usually the coups are caused by a grudge within. You look at people who are staging coups, it's either the army or those who are close to the army. And this same army would have been working with the guy who ends up being removed from power. So it starts within. We saw in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe fired his deputy Emerson Mnangagwa and he threatened the army, threatened to fire Chiwenga, threatened to arrest him. And at the end of the day, Chiwenga, because he noted this, staged a coup against his former master, and we had in place of a ruthless Zanu-PF, another ruthless Zanu-PF, despite all the promises that they gave us. So I will never support a coup. Let's all not support a coup. Now there are questions. So now what's next? I think I've spoken to that. The next thing, if we don't go to court, is for us to go back to the drawing board, involve Zanu-PF in negotiating for a compromise that will see Zimbabweans moving beyond toxic politics into the politics that delivers, into the politics of production, into the politics of development with Zanu-PF and those other party members from the opposition who won seats in parliament. We have the parliament. Let us go there to argue for a better Zimbabwe, to argue for a better transition from the toxic politics to the politics that delivers. The second is panel of SADC elders in Zim already. Yes, I believe they are in Zimbabwe. I think they've been there for some days. They will be there up to today. We haven't heard from them. As yet, I think they're still getting briefings from those that are contesting the results and the Zimbabwean government, or rather Zanu PF. But whatever comes out of there, let me tell you, will not lead to a forced situation whereby we are given fresh elections. Let's forget about fresh elections. Let us talk about how best we can prepare, how best we can rebuild Zimbabwe for the next 5 years, working with Zanu PF as the leading party, and how best we can prepare for a better and better run election in 2028. Threatening the opposition with imprisonment, etc., may not be the democratic modus operandi of the region. Exactly, that's what I've said, that people must not be threatened. People must be given space to institute democratic reforms. And Zanu PF, especially President Mnangagwa, was given a chance when he took over, even if he took over via a coup. The whole world sat back and said, let's give this guy a chance. I'm one of the people who campaigned for him to be given a chance. And then he was given a penalty. He failed to score without the goalkeeper. The whole world said Mugabe is gone. Maybe he was the wrong guy. Mnangagwa said all the right noises. He gave us hope that he was going to build a better and beautiful Zimbabwe. But what he did afterwards, he has failed. He's been given another mandate, and we hope that he's going to make it work this time. And the first way of doing that is not to threaten people. It is to allow people to express themselves. It is to allow people to politically be active. It is to allow people to tell you where their grievances are and for you to act on those grievances. People are hungry. Zimbabweans are leaving their country in droves. Those who are outside don't want to go back home. People on social media are very angry. They're insulting you. Instead of insulting them back, instead of scoffing at them or gloating that you will rule them till Jesus comes, you should be self-introspecting. What is it that you are getting wrong? Why are people so angry at you? Why are people challenging you like this? Why are they insulting you? Is there something that you can do better? If there is, do that better. I think that's the best way forward. So thank you very much. Those were the questions that we had. We will be back again next week. We plan to make this a weekly engagement process. Thank you for the questions that you posed. Please continue to keep them running. The number to contact us on is +27 73 962 3075 +27 73 962 3075. And this is not an opposition channel. It is not a Zanu PF channel. It is not a Zimbabwean channel. This is an African channel. We want to discuss issues from across the African continent, issues that are affecting Africans across the continent, so as to reach a lasting solution which will stop African countries producing migrants who end up toiling in menial jobs outside their countries of origin, being insulted there, dying there, or dying in the seas trying to go to Europe. The idea is to create a better Africa. We will also, in select weeks, be holding, instead of just a live broadcast, we'll be holding a live debate with political leaders. We have already scheduled one with Zanu PF, South Africa. They will come here. We'll hold a live interview where you will be sending your questions and they will be responding to you. We will ask them questions first. After we ask them questions and we have them respond, we will then go to your questions that you are posting here on our live feed, and then we'll ask them. They will respond to you. We'll bring in leaders from different African countries as well to engage with you here, leaders from different political parties in Africa to engage with you here, leaders from Ambazonia, leaders from, that is the South Cameroons, leaders from Biafra, leaders from Nigeria, from Cameroon, from Morocco, Western Sahara, South Africa, and every other country on the African continent that we can get to this platform. We have leaders from Mali, from Ethiopia, from Somalia. We'll bring them here again and talk to them. But we'll also, in select weeks, hold our political discussions every Friday at 1 p.m. So thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Keep those questions coming. Keep those suggestions coming. And if you are ready for an interview, we can hold even via Zoom. We can hold interviews and we'll share them here. Thank you very much.